Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Glad to be here with you again and to get started, and really happy that I think most of the JFO revenue team is joining us today to just introduce yourselves and tell us about the work. And is it helpful for us to all go around and introduce ourselves? That would be great. Okay, yeah, great. I'll start. I'm Emily Kornheiser. Hi.
Hi, Bill Canfield.
Morning, Julia Andrews, Chittenden 25.
Catherine Sims, Craftsbury.
Scott Beck.
Kurt Taylor, Colchester.
Peter Anthony, Berry City.
And I'm Carolyn Brannigan from Georgia, up in Franklin County.
Carol Odie, Burlington.
Carl Demerol from Corinth.
Well, I'm Catherine Benham, the Chief Fiscal Officer with the Joint Fiscal Office.
And I'm Emily Byrne. I'm an Associate Fiscal Officer heading up the revenue team. I'm taking over for Graham Campbell. You may remember.
Nice to meet you. And we have, we were going to walk through sort of a Joint Fiscal Office overview. Some of you know us, some of you don't know us as well. So just sort of a big picture and then talk through the revenues, if that sounds good with everybody. And there's a PowerPoint presentation on the webpage if you want to follow with it. And thank you. So the Joint Fiscal Office was established in 1973 to provide nonpartisan fiscal information and analysis. And by statute, we support the 4 money committees, the 2 appropriations, and the 2 Ways and Means of Senate Finance. We also support the transportation committees and the institutions committees. That's who we by statute support. So we do not support all committees. The Legislative Council works for all committees. We by statute do not. We do, however, support other committees that are doing sort of big fiscal. So healthcare is an obvious one where we have staff on it, and economic development, we have people helping work on that as well. So we are, Leg Council does the words, we do the numbers, and we do, you are one of our primary committees that we work for. The Joint Fiscal Committee, which is made of 10 members, is who we work for, and the Joint Fiscal Committee meets off session to deal with fiscal issues that come up before that are legislatively related. They have a limited role in making some decisions, accepting grants and other things that you all put before the Joint Fiscal Committee to deal with off session. We have 17 staff, and some consultants, and we're fully staffed, which is great. We're very excited. We have some familiar faces, some new faces, and you will meet some of them in a little bit. And we are, for those of you who don't know, we're at the Pink Lady, which is right that way, Pink House, right next door on the first floor, if you ever want to come visit us physically. And the doors are all locked. Your swipe badges should get you in. If not, there's a doorbell, and we all answer the door. So there's a Pink Lady. I sort of covered this appropriations, tax and revenue capital bill. I'm talking about the coverage areas we do. Transportation, climate change is another issue we've worked on. We were tasked with dealing with child care study. There's a report that's coming out. We contracted out with Brand to do a child care study that will be out on the 17th. Pensions and other things that need to pay, family leave, housing. I think a lot of the issues you'll be dealing with this year. You don't have this up here. In the PowerPoint is I'm just going to turn this on for those of you who are not looking at it. It's just a budget. It gives you a picture about the budget and what the various funds are, the capital funds and ARPA funds and general fund. So we have 8.3 billion, basically, when you include everything. 2 is general fund, almost 2 is education fund. Special funds are half. And federal funds were 3.5 billion, but $500 million of that was sort of the special COVID related things. So that gives you a sense of the scale of things that you're working with. We have another chart that just shows state versus federal money for the various parts of state government, if you want it, if you're interested in looking at that. And you can go to our webpage, which if you aren't familiar with it, I'm happy to sit down. Any of us could sit down with you and just show you what we have, information that's on the webpage. It's a separate webpage from your committee page. We do post a lot of interesting fiscal, at least I think it's interesting, useful fiscal information. The studies that we've done are up there. And some of the topics that you all work on really have crossed over many sessions. And so the legislative webpage is really about a biennium. Ours is more of a library resource where, I don't know, I'm trying to think about what you might, the income tax stuff. There's work that's been done on income taxes over the years that is relevant for current discussions. And so it's more organized by subject rather than by year.
And we're gonna have, Sorcia's gonna take us through on Tuesday afternoon, a tour of our own committee website and the joint fiscal website.
Well, and I should say Sorcia is the master of our joint fiscal office webpage also. So she knows them both really well. So you've sort of got the best resource here and on many dimensions, but in particular on the webpage, she can help you with that as well. Do you think they're outside? Did I go get them?
Somebody else that I can
I'll go
start.
get them.
So we're gonna do a quick, hopefully the 3 other revenue analysts are outside. We thought we'd bring them in and have them see their face, have them introduce themselves, but I'll go first. So I'm Emily Byrne. Some of you may remember me from I did 10 years in the executive branch before joining the Joint Fiscal Office at the end of August this year. I worked for the Agency of Education, I worked for the Department of Finance and Management, and I worked for the Agency of Natural Resources in different sort of fiscal capacities there. And changeover. And then I think, why don't we can put them on the spot because that's more fun. Julia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, for the record, I'm Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. I know a lot of you folks, but for those who don't know me, I do education finance and the ed fund primarily, so property taxes. Feel free to reach out with any questions, or if you need more details or primers on the ed fund, I'm happy to sit down with you.
Now that everyone's here, is it helpful for us to go, maybe we'll
Probably.
go around again and do another
Yeah,
introduction?
do all of us.
Why don't you all and then.
So I'm Pat Tiverton. I'm also a fiscal analyst. I deal with all things economic and workforce development. And I also will help you out with any consumption tax related issues you have.
Sales tax, what's consumption? Sales tax?
Sales tax, we got meals and rooms, a lot of excise taxes, sales tax. If you go to a store and you buy something and you pay a tax on it.
Pat's your guy.
You'll also be the cannabis tax fellow then.
Ted is actually cannabis.
Okay, let's get that clear.
So I'm Ted Barnett. I started with the Joint Fiscal Office in November, so I'm quite new, but I'm absolutely thrilled to be working in the State House this legislative session. I'm working on if there's anything happening with fee revenue, anything changes in that department. Also cannabis is in my wheelhouse, and we're still kind of figuring out since I'm new, but same thing. I'm happy to kind of listen and hear questions, and it's a good chance for me to learn about various aspects of revenues.
Yeah, and I should mention, some of you maybe saw me standing up. I'm not going to make it to the end of the session. I'm going to go on maternity leave about the end of March. So as a team, we're sort of figuring out where, as things come up, making sure it gets assigned to, whoever makes sense on the team, since, I don't want to take on a big policy area and then, one day just disappear and they're left, try to figure it out from there. So we're going to sort of coordinate that way. This year will be a little funky just given my maternity leave, but then next year we'll have a little bit probably more not siloed, but a little bit more specific assignments. And tentatively right now, I'm just going to make Ted come with me everywhere so that if and when, the inevitable happens, he's ready to jump right in and help out with things for some things. Julie will run point on some things, Pat on some things, but we'll figure it out. It'll be fun. But that's the team.
Let's all introduce ourselves.
Oh yeah, you guys go.
Definitely. I'm Emily Kornheiser. I think I've met all of you from Brattleboro.
Bill Canfield from Fairhaven.
Julia Andrews from Westford.
Catherine Sims from Craftsbury.
Jim Maslin, Deptford. Scott Beck, St. Johnsbury.
Kurt Taylor at Colchester.
Peter Anthony, Barry City.
Carolyn Brannigan from Georgia.
Carol Odie, Burlington.
Carl Demerol from Corinth.
And Representative Mattos has returned to the committee and will be sitting in that chair when he gets here in a little bit.
Great. Cool. All right. If you guys want to stay, you're welcome to, but you also have plenty to do. So if you want to go back, sit down. I won't be offended.
Good to see you.
Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
All right, so I'm going to dive into just a high-level revenue update, sort of where things are at through the first,
Before you do that, I
Yeah.
think a few people don't have their iPads going. So I don't know if you want to take a minute for folks to find their technology and open it up so they can see what you're showing.
Probably a good idea. I've got some
Just look at
tables
this.
and charts.
Great, thanks.
Cool. All right, I'll dive into a revenue update and I will, before I, get too far,
Just
give a minute.
we're just going to give it a minute.
I was just going to caveat it that there's a revenue forecast in 2 weeks. So everything I say now is going to change in 2 weeks. But this will be, this will sort of set the stage for what is likely to happen. Exactly.
So will the economist come in here or will you?
Yes, Tom Cavett we've scheduled the Tom Cavett tour after the emergency board. He'll be, I think, after the emergency board, he'll come to Ways and Means, then we'll go to Senate Finance, then we'll go to Appropriations in both bodies, and Transportation Committee. So I think he's here, his first stop is here on the 17th.
And everyone is welcome to come to the e-board on the 17th, but then Tom will come to the committee to go through it.
And I believe they're working on scheduling briefings for caucuses on the Friday beforehand.
That's
leadership.
So just leadership. Oh, sorry. So just leadership. Sorry, my bad.
We'll have two chances. Folks can come to the e-board meeting or watch the e-board meeting virtually, and then Tom will come to our committee specifically to answer questions and give the presentation.
Great. All right, I will jump in. First, just a high-level reminder of the revenue forecasting process. I know we've got some new committee members to Ways and Means. So per 32 BSA, section 305A, both in January and July, the emergency board meets to adopt a consensus revenue forecast for the three and a half major funds for the state. So the general fund, the education fund, the transportation fund, and the transportation infrastructure bond, which is is a smaller fund, but they present the consensus revenue estimates for that fund too. The emergency board is the chairs of the 4 money committees. So Representative Kornheiser, the chairs of Senate Finance and the 2 appropriations committees, and the governor. By statute, they meet in January and July, but if there's ever a sort of economic situation that requires that they meet more frequently, the governor can call them to meet and adopt revenue forecasts more often. That doesn't usually happen. It happened sort of during the 2008 economic crisis. They adopted revenue forecasts more frequently as the economy was sort of tanking throughout that year. And then during COVID, I believe there were a couple extra emergency board meetings just because things were so uncertain with where things are going. So in January, the board will adopt, I'm on slide 10, estimates for the current fiscal year and the following 2 fiscal years. So it will be an update for FY 2023, which will be the basis for the Budget Adjustment Act. And then FY 2024 revenue estimate, which will be the basis for the FY 2024 budget. Just put a reminder, this baseline it's sort of the baseline regardless of what happens to revenues between January and June. It may be that we have a surplus when we get to June, and it may be that we have a deficit when we get to June. But in terms of if there's excess money as a result of actual taxes coming in, it's not really available to spend. That baseline is really what's available for the budget. And then any sort of tax adjustments that you all make around that dictate that the revenue that's available to spend. So on slide 11, we're less than 2 weeks out of the revenue forecast. It's going to incorporate some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, but there are also sort of economic conditions and other things going on in the universe that will impact what actually gets incorporated into the forecast for the next 6 months. All right, so I thought it would be good to give just a quick comparison of where FY22 ended versus where FY23 was forecasted in July. On the general fund side, just to kind of show that 2022 ended really well. It ended above forecast, but they did adopt a forecast in 2023 that kind of moderates some of the growth that occurred. COVID was a really uncertain time. Turns out it was okay for revenues, but the economists adopted sort of a decision to moderate that growth going forward just because of economic uncertainties coming down the pipe. And, some of that activity as a result of COVID was really one time in nature and sort of unpredictable, and who knows if it will continue. So this just kind of shows that there was the forecast in 23 is below where 2022 actually came in for actuals on the general fund. For the education fund, there's actually some growth, sort of assumptions. The sales and use tax is the biggest piece that they forecast for the education fund. I should note that if you look at this on slide 14, these revenue sources to the education fund, you'll note it's missing the property taxes. The property taxes are calculated sort of separately and not done by the economists. So these are the sort of components of the education fund that are forecasted by the economists. There's another $1.5 billion that ends up in the education fund, as you're aware. And same with the transportation fund, projected a little bit of growth in the transportation fund. Nothing too crazy. And then if we go to slide 16, this is the actual performance year to date. So through December, this information will get posted on the JFO website, hopefully by the end of the day today or Monday. But year to date, we are ahead of forecast by about $65 million. December was about right on target in terms of forecast, but prior to that, personal income taxes are really driving what's going on in the general fund in terms of us exceeding revenues. And a lot of that, most of that, about 70% of personal income taxes from withholding payroll. And most of the overage is coming through the withholding component of the personal income tax. The economists will sort of incorporate some of this and then moderate as they feel appropriate for sort of what they think the economic conditions are going to be over the next 6 months. Let's see if there's anything else to pull on there. One thing I'll note, there's a little asterisk next to cannabis. I didn't have the month-to-month breakdown of the cannabis forecast. We did know we would get some revenue in the first 6 months. There's a 0 right there because I didn't have the first 6 month breakdown. But so far to date, we've almost pulled in $1 million in only 2 months for cannabis revenue. Similarly, the education fund is also doing okay. It's ahead of forecast, which is always a good thing, and mostly driven by the sales tax. So people are still buying things, is basically what that says. And I think there's probably some, to the extent inflation impacts prices and prices are up, and you charge 6% on a higher price, you end up with more revenue. So that might be a good question to ask the economist in terms of what's going on under that. Is that things cost more, therefore we have more revenue, or are people consuming more? And then the T fund is the only one that is a little bit in the hole. It's about $1 million under to forecast compared to forecast for the first 6 months of the year, driven mostly by the gas tax, but buoyed a little bit by the purchase and use tax. So during COVID, when the availability of cars really dropped off, people are starting to buy cars again.
On that, interest income, where's that from?
That's just the interest in the fund itself. So to the extent there's cash in the fund, we're earning.
It's not interest we pay. It's...
No, interest is coming to us, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sure. So then I'm off to slide 19. So this just kind of summarizes some of the things I talked about on each of those tables. Again, the general fund is doing well. Withholding is really where we're doing better. And that may be, I think I saw an article that that wages have gone up in Vermont this past year. So to the extent people's wages go up, what gets withheld also goes up. I'm sure the economists will speak to sort of, refunding that may happen in the next part of the year, depending on what happens with the economy on the corporate and personal income tax side. So that's sort of a thing that's out there that can happen in the second half of 6 months, or second half of the year, last 6 months of the year. The education, modestly exceeding expectations by the sales tax, and then the transportation fund challenges on the gas tax side, but improved by purchase and use. Slide 20, just wanted to, give a shout out to the website of where you can find this information. So it usually comes out first couple of days, they have to finish cashing all the checks at the tax department, make sure everything has been moved to the right funds, all that kind of stuff. And then usually by the second week of the month, we post sort of where things are going year to date if you ever want to check that out. There's the Schedule 2s, which are more of like a financial statement that show the FY22 collections year to date and the FY23 collections year to date. You can kind of compare the two. And then the target trackers sort of shows what the month over month, or what that month's estimated receipts were for a specific revenue type, and then what actually came in for that revenue type, if you're interested. So just sort of a couple concluding points on slide 21. So revenues are doing well through December, which is good news. You know, we still have 6 months left to go, so we're only halfway there. And this will all get incorporated to some degree on the 17th when the emergency board adopts a new revenue forecast. And they will speak more to sort of what's going on in the economy, what the likelihood is of, you know, there's continues to be rumblings of a recession, but the question is like, is it a little one or a big one, and all those sorts of things, and they'll incorporate that into their new numbers. I think that's all I have. Yes, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. And before we go to questions, just want to sort of let everyone know, this is a very quick, very high level overview. We are going to dive deeper into every single piece of this in the next 2 weeks. We're going to talk about ways and means jurisdiction. We're going to do a lot of time on the Ed Fund this first week, next week, including the CLA and the yield bill and all of that. And then we're going to spend the next week after the e-board going into federal and state connections, corporate taxes, income taxes, use taxes, all of it. So we're going to have a chance to dive deeper into each one of them. But does anyone have any questions?
Emily, the numbers for FY23 are all through the end of December or the beginning of December?
Through the end of December.
Okay.
Yep. Cool. The one thing I like in the back of my head, oh yeah, I was going to mention this. So if you look at the property transfer tax for compared to FY22, that is another area where the economists did take that's one where there was on a sort of total percentage where the economists did take the revenue estimate down pretty significantly, because there was, during COVID, when everybody was buying houses and the whole real estate stuff was changing over, they sort of mitigated that within that, which sort of has implications for the general fund, but also property transfer tax goes to the Clean Water Fund and a couple other places. So that was one I wanted to make sure to flag, but that was one that definitely got ratcheted back to a sort of bigger degree on a percentage basis.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Cool.
Thank you so much. Look forward to spending many, many hours with you this year.
Yes. Well, and I will see you all at noon for principles of a good tax system.
Yeah.
Right. I've never actually presented on the well of the house before, and that will be an interesting first time experience. So yeah, cool.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we are going to wrap up for the day, but ask everyone to be in the well of the house at noon for principles of a tax system. We're gonna have trainings for the next 3 Fridays, 3, 4?
We're skipping the 20th.
Okay.
And it is the before.
Okay.
But Ellen and I talk.
Yes, and those are, take us through the whole tax system. It's for all members to attend, but it's wonderful for all of us to attend, and they're all gonna be in the well of the house. And so grateful for Joint Fiscal for doing that for us all.
They all be at noon.
And they'll all be at noon, yep. And none of the caucuses, I think none of the caucuses are meeting during that time. There was a lot of rearranging of caucuses to leave that Friday free. Yeah. And then next on Tuesday, we'll do a little bit more committee housekeeping as well as some presentation. Anything from anyone before we? Okay.
Where did Graham go?
Graham went to New Zealand.
That's what I heard.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he had a third baby girl.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. He's busy. He's heading to New Zealand. He's dealing with visa, and now they have a new baby. They have to get a visa for the baby.
Oh,